Chicago.
The camera or you?
Both.
Okay. Any last question?
No, I think I'm good.
Let me know if you need.
Okay, thanks, Joe. This way. Alright. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bridging Chicago podcast. I'm Nathan, a senior legal assistant here at SATC Law and one of your hosts of the podcast. And I'm so excited today to be joined by Amy Wilhelmi, who is a licensed therapist amongst a lot of other things. So, do you want me to say counselor?
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
They're the same thing.
Okay. I'll start over just to get that clean.
Okay.
So,
Therapist is perfect.
okay, cool. So I was
No.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Bridging Chicago podcast. I'm Nathan, your host for today's episode. I'm a senior legal assistant here at SATC Law, and I'm so excited today to be joined by Amy Wilhelmi, a licensed therapist here in Chicago. And Amy, I had a chance to look at your background, and I'm excited because you do a lot, and so I know you're going to have a lot to share. But we always start with your Chicago story. So
Sure.
Why don't you share with us if you're from Chicago or if you came here from somewhere else?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I grew up kind of half in Schaumburg, Illinois, and then my mom moved us to DeKalb because she was a professor at Northern.
Oh, okay.
So Chicago, kind of far west. Grew up in cornfields of DeKalb, Illinois. But I have lived in the city a couple times. I went to city colleges for about a semester and a half.
Okay.
I moved back to the city as an adult, and I lived in Andersonville for a while. So, I still consider myself a Chicagoan in some ways. I moved away for graduate school, and then I moved back to the Chicago area.
So I'm also from the cornfields. I'm down by Bloomington Normal.
Okay.
So I totally get where you're coming from there. I've actually never been to DeKalb, interestingly, but it's very much that Midwestern culture and upbringing. For people who aren't familiar with that, can you share what it was like for you to have that Midwestern sort of mindset and what you learned about how you treat other people here in the Midwest?
Yeah, I just told you that I did move away. So when I moved away, I moved to the Bay Area in California, to San Francisco. And so it's very noticeable when you do that. So I really did kind of see the value in those Midwestern roots as far as things like hospitality or kindness or just the way that we're kind of polite or speak to each other. I think it's very apparent when you go other places. I mean, Californians are generally kind of transplants, so they're a mixture. They're on the chill side. But if you go to the East Coast, I feel like the difference is very big, right? Yeah. I feel like Midwesterners are just kind of generally like pretty kind and nice, and there's also these like hardworking kind of blue collar industrial roots, especially coming from like a farming community. I feel like part of my drive and why I do all the things that I do is probably that kind of Midwestern value system for sure.
I feel a lot the same way, and it's one of those things I feel like you don't know what you didn't know because your whole world is here. And so it's like we're wrapped up in like when we were kids, we would ride our bikes, we would go to the pool, play with our friends. Like anything that happened outside of the world that we lived in, we just didn't know about. And so I think that's one of the things that I really appreciate about my upbringing was that like everything was about people, and my mom's whole family lived in the same town. And so it was like family and just getting to really enjoy life as a kid. I think it just was so much fun.
Oh, for sure. Like have children myself, and I kind of grew up in the 80s, early 90s, and it was kind of the culture of like, okay, have fun with your friends, go rollerblading, be home by dark, go to the pool by yourself, be home later. And I feel like that develops some sort of like independence and like life skills that now doesn't happen as often because parents are just like shuffling children around and forming play dates for them, where we kind of had more freedom to just kind of learn how to be in life.
Yeah, how to interact. You mentioned you went to the city colleges, and I want to talk about that for a minute because I think education as a resource is really important. And a lot of people feel like you have to go to 4-year university after you graduate high school. And I think there used to be a stigma, like if you didn't go to a college, it meant you weren't smart enough or you weren't good enough or you weren't rich enough or whatever. But realistically, city colleges, but community colleges, trade schools in general are great options for people. And can you share your experience there and why you chose to go to a city college?
Sure. So I actually started out at Northern Illinois University because my mom was a professor there, and she was like, hey, we get a huge tuition discount, nudge, nudge, you should go here. So I did that for a semester, it was 1 year, but I felt like lost as a student because, for example, it was a big student population, and I would have lecture halls at 8 a.m. with 300 people in it, and my name on a Scantron, and it just didn't feel personalized enough for my learning style. Like I would like to interact with a teacher. I'd like to ask a question. I'd like to be able to raise my hand. And so I was like, this isn't working. I'm not sure I can graduate from a school like this. And so I spent 2 semesters at Harold Washington, just kind of figuring that out. And what I noticed was that smaller class size was much better for my learning style. I felt like the adult student population was much better for my learning style. I think growing up in the college town, I kind of got all that partying out of my system when I was actually like in high school. And then so when I got to that 4-year college, I was like, I need to like focus now and like be a good student. And that was hard for me in that big college atmosphere, where city colleges with the adult learning population, everybody is focused because they're mostly paying for it by themselves. The teachers, I feel like, are engaged and interesting and multicultural and have doctorate degrees. And, the students are there because they have one mission. Like they want to learn, they want to further their education, they want to get a degree. So it was a much better fit for me. I then did transfer to another 4-year school after that, but it was small. And so what I learned from city colleges is that small learning environment and that adult learning population just works.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you bring up, where at that time you're just learning a lot about yourself. And so you can do that in a lot of different places in a lot of different ways, but it's being in tune with who you are and your experience and what you're getting from it and what is good about it and what is not as positive about it. And I think being brave enough to sort of lean into that, and then to have the emotional and mental health and intelligence to say, okay, based on what I'm learning about who I am, what's the next step? Because for me, I think that's generally the hardest part is what do you do with the information that you've taken in? And I think having the intelligence to do that is really impressive, and I think kind of scary for a lot of people.
I mean, I guess then technically my undergraduate education were 3 stops, Northern and then city colleges. And then I transferred to this small women's college actually in Milwaukee called Alverno. No one's ever heard of it. And so everyone's like, wait, you're going to a women's college and no one's ever heard of this. Why are you doing that? But they had my degree program. So I had learned enough about myself probably through like those 2 other experiences that now I have a degree program in mind that's the best fit for me, and I'm just going to go pursue that. And that educational experience ended up being amazing. And, again, friends and family were like, women's college, tiny women's college, no, you know, so,
Yeah.
but you have to do what's right for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really respectable that you did that. And I think when I hear other people that do that, I'm like, wow, that's really impressive that you can do that, because it's not always the popular thing.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my friends that I had met at Northern were very confused. They were like, but we like partying with you and doing stuff. And I was like, but I have to focus. Like, I'm paying for this, you know?
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. I know that athletics is important to you now, and
Yeah.
I know that it's very much a part of your life and your work. So is that something that, were you always a fan of sports and a fan of athletes? Were you always an athlete, or is that
Yeah.
something that came later?
That's an interesting question. No, I was not always an athlete. I did dance and then cheerleading growing up.
Okay.
And then I kind of got sidetracked with that. In high school, I figured out that I can actually make art. I didn't know that I was an artist until like my sophomore or junior year of high school. And then I started taking art classes and realized that it was kind of this natural talent.
Yeah.
And so I stopped the cheerleading, and then I didn't really do anything athletic again until my third daughter was born. And then I was like, okay, I'm just feeling overwhelmed with motherhood and life, and I got to do something for my own stress relief.
Mm-hmm.
So then I started on this track of kind of trying all the group fitness entities. You know, I did core power yoga. Then I transferred to Orange Theory. Then I did F45. And I knew that like moving my body and releasing that energy was something that was good for my mental health.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what put me on that track of where I am now, which is competitive bodybuilding. I do bikini division bodybuilding.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I want to get back to that, but I want to take a little tangent for a second, because when you talked about after you had your third daughter and you made this choice of like, I need to do something to relieve the stress in my life, I think one of the hardest things for moms is, from an outside perspective, obviously, is like, it can feel selfish to step away from your family or raising your children and to do something for you, or to do something that doesn't seem to benefit the kids or the family as much as it does. But in this particular situation, of course, it was a benefit not just to you, but to everyone, for you to be able to do this. But did you feel any sort of like, did you feel guilty? Did you feel stress about stepping away? Or did you feel okay with that? And how did your family like come around you and say like, yeah, you need your time. You need to not be a mom for this hour that you're at yoga or whatever. How was that for you, thinking about that and then actually like going out and doing it? How did you feel when you first started doing something for yourself?
Yeah. I think the answer is absolutely feel guilty. Where I started, actually, I had a friend in the neighborhood that was teaching bar classes, which is kind of like ballet, if you're familiar.
Yeah.
In her basement, and then she had a babysitter that she hired, so I could actually bring the little ones, go to class, and so that was kind of how I was able to enter into that world.
Yeah.
And then similarly, the first, it was like a yoga bar studio, also had childcare. And so my first experiences were with studios that had childcare, which is amazing for moms, because then you don't feel as guilty. I think that there is a guilt about the financial piece of all of it, though, if I were to be honest, because these like, you know, elite studios are not cheap.
Right.
So you're like, okay, I'm taking some of our family's finances and putting it at this thing. But I mean, in my opinion, you know, it's so worth it. And I always say something like, it's kind of like being on the airplane and sitting in that exit aisle. Like, you need to put on your own mask first.
Yeah.
And if you are doing that and you're doing that consistently, then like you said, you are helping everyone around you.
Yeah.
Like, happier mom. Like, my kids would be like, oh, you're yoga mom today. And I was like, yes, you know, but they know. And now they know, they totally get it. Like now, like I go to the gym without them and I'm like high five and they're like, thank goodness she's going, you know?
Yeah. That's so good. It's great analogy. And I think it's so it's good information for people to hear, because I think that's really important. And just like everything else, it's an investment. Anytime you spend money, you're investing in something, and you just have to decide if that investment is a good one. And I think in this case, obviously it is.
Well, I mean, if you think about all the things that people invest in that are not healthy or not getting them towards their goals, like going out to eat all the time or going out to drink all the time or whatever, like we all know that's not necessarily, that's a financial burden, and it's not making you healthier.
Yeah. In this time, mental health and caring for your mental health is a little more prevalent. People understand a little more why it's so important, but it hasn't always been like that, and the investment hasn't always been there, and the resources haven't always been there. Do you remember when you started to really investigate mental health and understand its importance and how it played a role in your life?
Absolutely. There are some pivotal moments. So most therapists that are licensed kind of do their time, which means like we have to have worked in some sort of like nonprofit or like a difficult mental health situations in order to get training, right? So I was working in a residential facility for children and families in San Francisco. It was considered a level 14 residential facility, which basically means the step right before these children would have gone to juvenile hall. So very, very difficult population, mostly foster kids, high prevalence of trauma. And what I found in that setting was that they weren't necessarily getting the therapies that we know work for really bad trauma. It was mostly kind of just like a holding facility because we didn't really know what else to do with them, right? And so that's when I started to kind of like dig into like what works, what doesn't work, how I would want to do things differently. And I really started thinking of a more holistic model that included what we're talking about, which is like a more like lifestyle overhaul, and then, the proper treatments for trauma woven in.
Okay. And that's some pretty intense stuff to work with.
Yeah, for sure.
How did you care for your mental health during that time?
Yeah. Well, I lived in San Francisco, so that was great. I was able to get out into nature. I really love, the redwood trees, and I love the ocean. And so time spent away. Actually, San Francisco is kind of funny because it's always kind of overcast, right? And so some days when the sun kind of pops through, everyone's like, okay, we're done. And then they just go to the beach, right? So like I would spend a lot of time just like at the ocean, grabbing a coffee and sitting by the ocean, walking around, trying to enjoy all the beautiful natural surroundings, and go to yoga.
Yeah. That's awesome. So we mentioned you're an athlete, competitive bodybuilder, which is amazing. I wish I could say that, but clearly I'm not. What is the feeling you get when you're competing? Like, I know. So I play volleyball, and so I kind of, when you're in competition, it's almost like being a different person for me. It's like you take on a different persona. But for you, what is that like? What are you like? How do you step into that space, and how is that different than if you're just at home with your family or even here right now? Yeah,
I think besides the stage, we'll talk about that in a second, but what it's really taught me is this level of dedication and organization and planning that it takes to be able to execute that. Because the stage day is fun, but it's kind of just the show of all the things that you've worked so hard for so long. Right. So to me, the biggest value is the daily, like, I'm going to hit all my nutrition correctly. I'm going to do my training. I'm going to do my cardio. I'm going to check in with my trainer. I'm going to stay on the plan, right? Because bodybuilding is kind of a science. It works if you follow the plan, and then it really doesn't work if you don't follow the plan. So I think like just learning that that consistency is such a mindset game changer, because then you're just like, okay, this is what I do. And it's become obviously a lifestyle for me. Otherwise, I wouldn't keep doing it.
Right.
You know, but I think the benefits of all of that are like mentally are just kind of this huge, you know, mental benefit. And then the stage is fun. The stage is kind of just like, okay, here's the show of all my work, and you know, we get glammed and tanned and walk up there and you know, kind of are able to present that package that we've worked so hard for.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's such an image competition. It's such an image focused arena. And so, you know, especially I think young girls growing up, so much about their image. They're being told about how good they are based on their image. And so, and not that boys aren't, I think we all are at some points in different ways, but being in an industry that seems so image focused, how do you stay healthy knowing that like part of what you're doing is actually competing based on that?
Yeah. I think what is amazing about this industry that maybe you don't just like see is that the camaraderie is amazing. Like I'm on a team. Okay. So this team has hundreds of athletes on it. We're all together. We're all cheering each other on. And so it's kind of the opposite actually of what they teach women. Unfortunately, we're kind of socialized to be competitive with each other in all things. And I feel like the team, again, is kind of the opposite of that. We're like, you go girl. Like I'm on a group text for this weekend and people are like, is anyone going to the store? Can you grab me some egg whites? You know, could somebody help me with my tan? How do I do this? This is my first time. I need my suit fixed or whatever. And so there's just this community that I wasn't expecting. Okay. And then also, as far as that image, you know, being judged on your appearance, it's like, yes, but like also culturally, like muscular women is not really a thing. Right. You know, we're kind of taught the opposite. We're kind of taught like, don't lift because you might get too big, eat a bunch of salad, do a lot of cardio. And so the bodybuilding community is different. It's like actually teaching women like, no, you need to eat a lot of food, first of all. And lifting is not going to make you a giant. It's okay, you know? And it's just so empowering to be in a body that you have built. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really cool. I think that it's really good to be able to see many different body types in your everyday life on TV. I think one of the things, you know, growing up when I watched TV, it's like I didn't see a lot of people that looked like me. I didn't see a lot of people that sounded like me. I didn't see a lot of people that thought the same things as me. And so getting to see that more for me has been really amazing. And I think there are girls out there that see what you do and are like, I really want to do that. I was really interested in that. And I thought, you know, oh, all the girls are doing gymnastics, or like you were saying when you were growing up, it's dance, gymnastics, cheerleading, all these things that it's like, those are very typical of girls at that age, but there's also so many other things that they can do.
So many other things. Yeah, I mean, it's been nothing but an empowering experience for me. And there's like athletes that I meet that just have such an amazing story too. You know, we have a lot of people that are athletes because they're recovering from an eating disorder. Bodybuilding teaches you to eat food, you know, that they're recovering from a substance abuse, you know, thing. And there's like zero room to abuse substances because your body can't handle bodybuilding and substances, right? Yeah. So to kind of replace that with something that's healthier. So there's just all these amazing stories of empowerment.
Yeah. Speaking of these stories, I want to talk about some athletes that we learn have these mental health, I don't want to say mental health issues, but share more about their mental health and about what being in competition does to them. Most people probably know Simone Biles when she was competing in the last Olympics, didn't compete in all of the I don't know what they're called,
Events.
the events that she was scheduled to because she needed to step away.
Right.
Naomi Osaka, who has been scrutinized, I think, maybe not more, but as much as anyone else in the sports industry. And I mean, it just, the scrutiny that she's come under has been huge, and she's had to step away from some stuff, going back to Michael Phelps when he was swimming and what he was feeling. I mean, can you help us understand a little more the mentality of these athletes and what maybe brought them to the point to where it's like, I cannot do this anymore because the toll that it's taking is so huge?
I think what people don't see for some reason with elite athletes is that they are human.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we're like, okay, go and do the thing. And if they're not doing whatever it is they're trained to do, we're like, oh, that, what are you doing? But what happens when there's things going on in your own personal life? You can't just ignore or cut out, one quadrant of your life and just say, like, that's not happening, right?
Right.
So, I mean, I don't know exactly what's going on with these athletes personally, right? But I would imagine it's kind of personal stress over time that's built up that they just haven't dealt with on a regular basis. Because again, if we're talking about training and sleep and nutrition and physical therapy and recovery and, maybe trying to have a little bit of a social life, if they're not doing the wellness piece, which is maybe seeking mental health therapy or seeing other kind of holistic wellness providers, if they just kind of like let that go by the wayside, they're like, oh, I don't have time for therapy this week, or whatever. Like, what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they're put under so much extreme pressure to just perform. I imagine that at one point or another, your body just kind of shuts down.
Yeah.
And it's really kind of their physical body, I think. You see this with tumblers. Like, if we're talking about Simone Biles, like, it's not like they can't tumble anymore. It's because there's a mental block.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And you look at Olympians, and a lot of them are under a certain age. A lot of them are very young, and I don't think it's just that their bodies can't do that anymore after a certain age, but it's just there's so much. I mean, you think about the 30th, the person that comes in 30th place in an Olympic event is that much better than any regular person.
Oh, right. They're just like a superhuman.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like, and maybe they come in last in their event, and yet, like, they would school anyone else.
Right.
And
I feel like there's also this like fear that happens with elite athletes about like the next step. Like, what happens if I don't do this thing?
Yeah.
Like, what do I do with my life? And unfortunately in our culture, that's happening younger and younger.
Yeah.
I work with a physical therapist, and she's like, I have these kids in my office all the time that have torn ACLs or other pretty severe injuries, Achilles stuff. And their parents just keep being like, okay, when can they get back on the field? When can they do the thing?
Mm-hmm.
And then she's like, sometimes I ask the children, like, hey, do you even like playing soccer? And they're like, like, my mom thinks I'm going to get a college scholarship.
Hi, Nathan here again. I just wanted to make sure that we told you about Amy's book that's out right now, Make Mental Gains. This is a short form book that will soon be followed by a longer version of the lessons and stories that Amy's learned along the way. This is a really interesting book. I really like the way that it was laid out. I like how you learn something from her life trajectory. Amy shares how we're all on a growth trajectory, and I think that that's really important to remember. This book is a quick read, but it's so helpful, and I think that you would find a lot of value in that. It is currently on Amazon. Again, that's Make Mental Gains by Amy Wilhelmi on Amazon. And you can be looking for the longer version of this book coming out this fall, and that will also be available on Amazon. Or, of course, you can visit her website to find all the ways to connect with Amy and to purchase her current book. So we hope that you'll look into that. We hope that you've enjoyed this episode with Amy and all the lessons that she's learned along the way.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Bridging Chicago, as produced by the SATC Solutions Center. Nothing contained in this podcast shall constitute financial, investment, legal, and/or professional advice. No professional relationship of any kind is created between you and the podcast host or guest. You are urged to speak with your financial, investment, or legal advisors before making any investment or legal decisions. Furthermore, the opinions expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the opinions of SATC Solutions Center, SATC Law, or any of its employees. This podcast is created by the hosts and guests' individual capacities. All opinions on this podcast are or have been rendered based on specific facts, under certain conditions, and are subject to certain assumptions and may not and should not be used or relied upon for any other purpose, including but not limited to, or use in or in connection with any investment purposes or legal proceeding.